European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is calling for stronger measures around border security after tens of thousands of Moroccan migrants crossed into Spain last week. The migration incident in Ceuta triggered division among some EU countries, with the bloc's interior ministers holding an emergency meeting today. Olivia Sundberg Diez is an EU advocate on migration and asylum at Amnesty International and joins me now from Brussels. Good to have you with us today. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, she says she wants united action on border security in the EU. What is she referring to when she says united action?
Thank you very much for having me. And indeed, what we've seen now in response to the events in Ceuta has been a very divisive response from a lot of different European governments. And the Commission is now attempting to bring those into a more unified position. From Amnesty International, what we have been calling EU leaders to do is to respond with humanity and with solidarity to the situation in Ceuta, as with any increase in arrivals in the EU. One of the most tragic events that have happened in the last days is that at least 72 people have lost their lives while trying to enter Europe to seek a better future. And that tragedy should be at the center of the discussions. Unfortunately, the initial response that we saw from many European states to the events in Ceuta was a deeply troubling, divisive, inflammatory, and dangerous one. We saw many governments attempting to exploit the recent events for political gain, to further shut down or externalize their borders, or to try to use it as a cynical tool to legitimize the EU's new hyper-focus on deportations as the main and first response to people seeking protection. We've seen a lot of unconscionable rhetoric describing what happened as an invasion, using a lot of racist stereotypes, and that's something that we hope would be firmly rejected. And unfortunately, at the meeting of EU leaders, which is ongoing at the moment, so we don't know what the conclusions will be, we understand that the focus for many European governments and for the European Commission will be to reinforce the border, to make it ever harder to enter Europe in search of protection or in search of a better life, to find ways to fast-track deportations and to make it harder for people to access safety, when really what we need is a humane, sustainable response based on solidarity, including urgent support for Spain and for people that are in Ceuta still at the moment.
Who would you then blame, at least with the Ceuta incident, for the dozens of people, of those migrants who lost their lives?
There's a lot that we don't know about the events, and it's not our place to speculate what led to the events in Ceuta happening. But there are a lot of questions that need to be asked, and we hope that there will be an investigation because the victims and their families deserve answers and they deserve justice and accountability. There are important questions to ask, I think, more broadly. On one hand, about to what extent Europe's overarching strategy of externalizing border management to other countries, relying on countries like Morocco and others across its external border to manage and stop migration on its behalf. Some governments with questionable human rights records as well. To what extent this reliance on other governments to stop migration exposes the EU and Europe to political blackmail, leaves them vulnerable on these dependencies, meaning that at any moment, governments can stop patrolling the border in the same way as they do, therefore creating a sort of artificially constructed crisis. And I think this is made a lot worse when governments, as some European and international governments have done, escalate and create more panic in response to those crises, rather than addressing situations as they arise with humanity, with solidarity, and in full compliance with international law. The international legal regime exists precisely for situations like this, precisely for situations under pressure. There's also a lot that we still don't know about the response, and it's something that Amnesty International will be following closely. There's many people that reached Ceuta, in some cases, people coming from places other than Morocco, like Sudan, countries that are ravaged by conflict, that need to have the right to seek asylum, and it's important that they have access to that asylum. People with important humanitarian needs, and we hope that those needs are being addressed. They will need reception. Many people made it there with very little food, very little clothes, very little money, and they need urgent support. It's important that there hasn't been an unlawful use of force, so that's something that we will be following from both Moroccan and Spanish authorities. And we've also seen a lot of reports about unlawful deportations, meaning immediate pushbacks from Spain back to Morocco, without an individual assessment of whether people wanted to seek asylum, whether people may have been in danger if they're sent back to Morocco. These collective expulsions are unlawful in all cases, no matter the circumstances of how people arrived. So that is something we have been we will be looking into.
But how possible is it, though, to process in a very short space of time, 60 to 70,000 people who've come in, who've rushed into Spanish territory from Morocco? I mean, would you expect the Spanish government to be able to undertake a task like that?
It's a difficult task, and indeed we've seen a very swift and broadly organized response from the Spanish government. And the reports seem to indicate that some people returned voluntarily, but we don't know to what extent that has been the case for everybody. Even in situations of a rapid increase in arrivals, you cannot ignore international law and you cannot ignore people's right to seek asylum. That does not mean that collective expulsions are permitted in those cases, because you may be sending somebody to danger. So those issues are important. There have been very positive elements in the response. There have been a lot of people that have received humanitarian assistance that they needed. There have been attempts to recognize some vulnerable people, including children. But there's a lot that we still don't know. It's still early days to understand how the full response has happened.
Yes, and to what extent, from the research that you do, human trafficking operations responsible for, an episode like this?
As I said, there's a lot that we don't know about what were the factors that have led people to seek to make it to Europe, in particular in a short amount of days. It's possible that there were elements of disinformation online, but it's really too early to say what the various causes have been. As I said, interesting elements to look at are to what extent is Europe relying disproportionately on third countries to manage migration in a way that leaves it vulnerable to then those borders not being patrolled in the same way from one day to the next, making that surge in arrivals possible. I think another element is, again, in the broader European strategy, to what extent is Europe's attempt to close and externalize its borders rather than investing in safe and regular pathways to what extent does this mean that for many people who are striving for a better future, who see no future for themselves or see their lives at risk for whatever reason in third countries, don't have any option but to turn to irregular crossings? I think these are broader questions that we need to be asking, but in terms of this particular incident and what caused it, it's too early to say.
Okay, Olivia, Sundberg, Diez, really good to get your thoughts there from Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.